In episode 20 of the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco, we begin the story of a guajira still sung in flamenco that has at least 135 years of history. It was part of the zarzuela Los de Cuba. In episode 21, we will see how, due to its popularity, flamenco artists began to sing and record it at the beginning of the 20th century. Even today, you can still hear it sung by some flamenco singers.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco. Hi, how are you? I am great, and I hope you are too. Today we will continue with the story of the guajira of Los de Cuba that we started in the previous episode. If you didn't listen to it, I recommend you to do so before continuing to listen to this episode, to enjoy the whole story from the beginning. If you have already listened to it, I remember that in the previous episode, we started talking about a beautiful story of a guajira included in the zarzuela Los de Cuba from 1888, which contains décimas or stanzas that already appeared in earlier Cuban sources. We also commented that although initially in the score of this number it is indicated that a punto is sung, soon everyone knew this number in Spain as a guajira instead of a Cuban punto. We also saw how this punto or guajira was conceived as a flamenco piece. Let's remember that we are in the period called flamencomania, and it is very common to include flamenco pieces in these works of the género chico, as we saw in episode 10 of this podcast. Well, a few years after the premiere of this zarzuela, we already find several flamenco singers performing this guajira and recording it in the first phonographic recordings. Antonio Pozo El Mochuelo included this zarzuela in her regular repertoire for years, making several phonographic recordings, with a title that left no doubt to its origin, Guajira de Los de Cuba. I even found some announcements of the sale of these records also in Mexico. In an interview with El Mochuelo, published in November 13, 1933, in the newspaper from Madrid called La Voz, he comments on the most popular song of his youth, referring to this guajira. I will read what the Mochuelo said. There is no Spaniard a quarter of a century old or older who does not remember that farruca that came through abuse to torment the ears of the peninsula, nor the guajira that reached an infinite multiplication. Soon the morning will come when the dense fog, ay ay ay. Well, what do you think if we listen to this guajira interpreted by El Mochuelo around 1905? This recording comes from the Laboratoire de Recherche Historique Rhône-Alpes and is accessible in the web platform Europeana.
La mañana en que la neblina densa, en que la neblina densa, en que la neblina densa ya extienda su capa inmensa sobre la verde sabana. Las ceibas americanas se alzarán sobre los montes y melodiosos sinsontes trinarán de acá y para allá, y el sol iluminará los cubanos horizontes. Guajirito de mi pensamiento, canta, canta despacito, la guitarra me rajea, porque el campesino me puntea. ¡Bravo, bravo, muy bien, venga, vino!
The singer Encarnación Esteban La Rubia also recorded this guajira in the early years of the century. As a curious note, there are discrepancies in the name of this artist in flamenco research, as this guajira appears on a couple of records of compilation of old cantes. In the one entitled Antología de Cantadoras Malagueñas, it appears with the name La Rubia de Málaga, while in the CD Flamenco con Raíces Sudamericanas, it appears as Encarnación Lagos La Rubia. Antonio Ortega Escalona, Juan Breva also recorded this guajira in 1910 for Zonophone, under the name Con que te lavas la cara, accompanied on guitar by Ramón Montoya. I also located this copla in Spain a few decades later on a pianola roll dated between 1929 and 1936 under the name Guajira Cubana, Cuban Guajira. In addition to these interpretations in the early years of the 20th century, this guajira has continued to be sung in flamenco up to the present day. For example, the flamenco singer from Cádiz, Juan Ramírez Sarabia, known as Chano Lobato, used to sing the second stanza and the refrain, which he ended his guajira by accelerating the tempo until they became bulerías de Cádiz. Another flamenco artist who has sung it until recent times is Jesús Heredia Flores, who recorded it in 1995 under the title Le vas a decir al lechero. He uses original lyrics very different from those of the original work, even with different metric. He sings a refrain that also has a more lively tempo. I consider that this final acceleration is not an original contribution of these flamenco singers since, as I show you in episode 3, the Andalusian dance master José Otero published in 1912 the choreographic description of the guajira dance, indicating that it will end with a zapateado with a lighter tempo. These two flamenco singers I mentioned made slight adaptations in the lyrics. For example, Chano Lobato in the refrain replaced the line porque el punto pide puntear with porque el cante pide puntear, which, although it becomes a sentence that does not make much sense, at least it may have something more to them than the original. Chano Lobato also changed mamoncillo for guajirillo, perhaps because the original term may have other connotations in the Cádiz and Andalusian context. All of these changes, in addition with the musical ones, are part of the process of assimilation that flamenco artists have made of this Cuban punto. This guajira is still being played today. The singer David Lagos, for example, recorded it a few years ago, and the Canadian group Notas de Cuatro, with the singer Silvia Temis from Veracruz, who has kindly allowed us to listen to her version in this episode. By the way, the musical proposal being made by this group, Notas de Cuatro, is exciting, in which several different musical cultures converge, including flamenco. I recommend it. Let's listen to only the refrain of this guajira in a concert in Calgary in 2019.
Corazoncito, no tengo aliento, me dejaste muy solita. El alma me pide tu cantar y tu voz quisiera yo escuchar.
Well, finally, let's go to Cuba for a while. There, I have also found this lyric. It appears on a recording titled Tonada Quibicareña El Flamboyant, sung as a duet by Manuel Rivero and Sergio Hernández. This recording was made in Quibicam, Mayabeque province, in 1986. It is included in the CD that accompanies the publication Puntos y Tonada by Zobeida Ramos Bereneo. In this book, Zobeida briefly exposed the different types of punto. In the so-called punto central, in which she includes this punto, she comments that it is usual to sing a 4-line refrain, although it does not appear in the Rivero and Hernández recording. She says the following: this tonada generally carry a refrain at a song's end, which is a closure. Tonadas with refrain, although they are sung fundamentally in the punto central style, can also be found in the Western style, as sometimes a décima with the characteristic of this style is sung followed or preceded by a refrain in the form of a cuarteta. At the punto of Los de Cuba is included this 4-line refrain after singing 3 décimas. I will not go into rambling about whether Ángel Rubio may have known the music of this type of punto and recodified it in an orchestral version, or vice versa, that due to the popularity of this zarzuela in Cuba, the people ended up singing it as happened in Spain with flamenco singers. The fact that it contains a refrain and that it is typical of this type of puntos sung by Rivero and Hernandez is one more indication, in addition to the musical structure similarities that I have identified and that I have presented in my doctoral dissertation, that the two works are necessarily related in some way. Well, I hope you have enjoyed these 2 episodes that I have dedicated to this delicacy that is the guajira of Los de Cuba. If you're lucky enough to listen to it on occasion, I hope that you will remember the long transit that this music and its lyrics have had both through time and geographic space, and that you can feel in some way that the sounds continue to unite lands that have always been sisters. From here, my deep gratitude to the Cuban people and institutions that facilitated my research work there in the island. I only ask you one last thing, that you subscribe to this podcast on platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, or also the YouTube channel Sonidos Olvidados Etnomusicología Creativa. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you for the next episode.